That's not new. Here's what is new. The president acknowledges that Putin may be a killer, but adds, quote, "We've got a lot of killers." Listen.
Do you respect Putin?
I do respect him.
Do you? Why?
Well, I respect a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get along with him. He's a leader of his country. I say it's better to get along with Russia than not. Will I get along with him? I have no idea. It's very possible I won't.
Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent?
With me on the phone, our chief national security correspondent, Jim Sciutto. Also with us, CNN former Moscow bureau chief Jill Doherty. Jim Sciutto, where do I begin? This is seemingly the president of the United States standing up for Vladimir Putin. How do you read this?
Listen, the word unprecedented has been overused, right, including in the CNN book. But this is unprecedented by a U.S. president speaking about his own country, that kind of moral relativism with not just a U.S. adversary, but an authoritarian state that is well-known, documented for enormous examples of mistreatment of its own people at home and abroad. You could certainly say unpresidential, at least if you're talking about being president of the United States, to describe your country in that way. And listen, I've traveled a lot in countries like Russia, China, elsewhere, that will often use this moral relativism as a propaganda talking point that, well, the U.S. has done just as bad as we have. Listen, you and I know, Poppy, Jill knows, the U.S. has made many mistakes, but the question is, putting it on a par with an authoritarian state such as Russia is, one, just not factually true, and two, just a remarkable thing for an American president to say. And let's just throw out a couple current examples, okay? Russia deliberately bombed civilians in Syria. Yes, U.S. airstrikes have killed civilians. The U.S. military takes enormous steps to avoid civilian casualties. Russia deliberately bombed civilians. Russia has annexed land in Europe, annexed Crimea in violation of multiple international treaties and international law. That's something the U.S. doesn't do. Russia supplied weapons to separatists in eastern Ukraine that shot down a civilian airliner over Europe and killed nearly 300 people. Russia poisoned with a radioactive substance a dissident on the streets of London, Litvinenko. I covered that story several years ago. It has killed, murdered journalists, critics, other dissidents of the state. That's just at the top of the list, and these are things Jill knows better than me.
Right.
Of the way this government acts. So to equate the two is, one, wrong, and two, just remarkable to hear out of the mouth of an American president.
And Jill, to build on Jim's point, case in point, one of the biggest and most vocal opponents and critics of Vladimir Putin, Boris Nemtsov.
Yes, and there are others. I mean, right now we have Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was poisoned, it's believed, a while ago, and he's back in the hospital. Now, no one is saying that necessarily Vladimir Putin did that, but I think the important thing is, why is President Trump saying this? And this is not the first time he said it. He said it in disdain about kind of, the old Soviet way. Well, there's this phrase that's called whataboutism. And whataboutism is, I don't know whether President heard about whataboutism, but that is in the Soviet days, in the Cold War, in the 60s, etc., the United States actually did assassinate other leaders, but that was outlawed in 1976. So I think the question that people should be asking President Trump is, give examples. What are you saying? What killing do you have in mind that the United States is doing that would be equivalent to what, let's say, the Russian system or the Russian government
However, it's the first time as a sitting president that he has said this, and that's what makes it different this time than when he was then in 2015. A, do you think that this just gives cover to Vladimir Putin? And B, how will his fellow Republicans on both sides of the aisle, do you believe, react? Many of them who were calling for tougher sanctions against Russia in response to the hacking of the election. Now this.
Well, first question first. Listen, this is enormous ammunition to Russia, but not just Russia, to other countries who seek to undermine U.S. soft power. Just as Donald Trump's claim of 3 to 5 million false voters, right? Again, factually untrue, but you have an American president giving ammunition to folks who will say the U.S. democratic system is not what it's cracked up to be. So, this has become a pattern from a President Trump. So that's one. From the Republican side, I've been spending the last hour reaching out to a number of Republicans for their reactions. I don't have on-the-record reactions yet. If it fits previous patterns when the president has said things like this, you will have many Republicans who will say nothing. You may have a handful who will stand up, and maybe a McCain, maybe a Graham, who've been particularly vocal, one willing to criticize the president, but particularly vocal on Russia. And again, this is not a view that is held by Democrats or Republicans, that Russia is not so bad, that Putin's a great leader to be admired, and that, what they do is not much worse than what we do. It's just not a view you hear from Americans, right? So it's it'll be interesting to see who is willing to go on the record criticizing the president's comments.
Jill Doherty, what should we expect from President Trump and President Putin going forward, given the fact that the first time it's believed that the two men even spoke was just last week?
I think it's very hard to predict exactly what will happen, because if you examine what the president said today to Bill Riley, he was kind of on autopilot, I think. He said the same thing. President Trump said the same thing he always says. I mean, he said that a million times. And yet, at the very moment that he said that, or a day before, his is slamming Russia for its actions in Ukraine and calling for an end to the occupation of Crimea. So already you have a very disorganized and unclear approach to Russia. I mean, this is loose thinking, and it's loose talk. Really, what I think the president has to do is buckle down, get a policy, and not make these kind of, I would call them kind of pandering remarks, meant to kind of say, well, I understand this is how the world works. When you're the president of the United States, you cannot do that. It's not, you don't speak loosely about something like murder and assassination. To see a real policy by President Trump, then I think, it's fair to criticize, to say, show us what you really are going to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we know, this is a president who has said, I don't want to show my cards. Jim Sciutto, Jill Doherty will leave it there. I appreciate all your analysis tonight. Stay weak, straight ahead. My political panel weighs in.
Choose to go, to indulge your curiosity. Explorers who change the game. No matter where you are, no matter what the currency. When you run the numbers, they may surprise you, but stay yours. You're on the path to success. CNN Money.